Nothing you said matters. Every single
Welcome
thing,
back, Greg.
No, everything you said does not matter.
On September 15th, 2025, live on The Five. Greg Gutfeld lost patience. He raised his voice and cut off Jessica Tarlov as she referenced a both sides argument about political violence. Gutfeld rejected it outright. He called the argument meaningless. The studio fell silent for several seconds. The clip went viral that same night. Gutfeld is one of Fox News' most powerful conservative figures. He co-hosts The Five and anchors the late-night show Gutfeld, known for sarcasm and direct verbal attacks. Tarlov is the only liberal voice in the 4-to-1 format. She relies on data, polling, and structured reasoning to push back. Their conflict is not personal. It is a sustained collision between two opposing ideologies. Now, let's dive in. Background and context of the conflict. The Five debuted on Fox News in 2011, at a time when U.S. cable television was rapidly shifting toward direct confrontation-driven programming. The formula was straightforward: 5 hosts, no rigid script, and fast-paced discussion of the day's political headlines. Each host represented a distinct viewpoint, but conflict was always the core. The Five was never designed to build consensus. It was designed to produce collisions. In its early years, the role of the liberal voice belonged to Juan Williams. During that period, debates were more restrained. Williams tended to respond cautiously and helped keep discussions within controlled boundaries. That dynamic changed noticeably in 2017, when Jessica Tarlov joined the panel. Tarlov was younger, more academic, and more willing to confront her co-hosts directly. From that point on, the 4 conservatives versus 1 liberal structure became sharper and more openly adversarial. From 2023 through 2026, The Five consistently ranked among the highest-rated programs on U.S. cable news. In many weeks, it outperformed CNN and MSNBC in average daily viewership. This success did not come from exclusive reporting or high-profile guests. It came from an argument. More specifically, it came from the recurring clashes between Greg Gutfeld and Jessica Tarlov. Greg Gutfeld sits at the center of those clashes. His style is built on sarcasm and direct attack. Gutfeld speaks quickly, interrupts often, and does not hesitate to use blunt language. On air, he readily labels opposing arguments as bullshit or dead arguments. This approach did not emerge by accident. It was shaped during his years hosting Red Eye, where provocation, mockery, and personal jabs were part of the format. When Gutfeld moved to The Five, he carried that style with him, applying it to more serious political debates. He positions himself as a surrogate for conservative voters and frames his attacks as resistance to what he sees as liberal hypocrisy and media double standards. On the opposite side, Jessica Tarlov consistently plays the role of the program's token liberal. She enters debates armed with polling data, policy reports, and electoral statistics. Her arguments are structured and policy-focused rather than personal. She rarely initiates attacks. However, this method often leads Gutfeld to accuse her of whataboutism, arguing that she avoids the core issue by pointing to failures on the other side. For the most part, Tarlov maintains composure, but when discussions turn to political violence, reproductive rights, or family-related issues, her emotional investment becomes more visible. The conflict between the two did not erupt overnight. It accumulated gradually. During 2022 and 2023, debates over immigration and border security began to draw a clear line between them. Gutfeld framed illegal immigration as a direct cause of crime and social instability. Tarlov countered with data, emphasizing economic context and policy responsibility. Neither persuaded the other. These unresolved disagreements carried into the 2024 presidential election, when arguments over the legitimacy of results and the role of political violence intensified. By 2025, Politically motivated assassination attempts pushed the conflict beyond policy and into more personal territory. Despite the on-air tension, Gutfeld and Tarlov's off-camera relationship remains professional. Gutfeld has publicly apologized after raising his voice at Tarlov during a broadcast. Tarlov has repeatedly stated that they respect each other behind the scenes. They communicate normally at work and do not carry political conflict into their personal lives. On a broader level, their conflict reflects the post-Trump political environment in the United States. Fox News is frequently criticized for its conservative tilt. Within that structure, Tarlov functions as a counterweight, even though she is often isolated. This built-in opposition makes the Gutfeld-Tarlov clash not an occasional incident, but a structural feature of the Five itself. The major debates and their evolution. The conflict between Greg Gutfeld and Jessica Tarlov unfolded gradually. Shaped by repetition rather than explosion, it followed a clear timeline. Each argument built on unresolved tension from earlier debates. Over time, the exchanges became sharper, less playful, and more personal. What began as ideological disagreement hardened into a defining feature of the Five itself. 2022 to 2024. Establishing the fault lines. The earliest clashes that gained wide attention occurred in 2022, when political violence and cultural responsibility became recurring topics on the show. One of the first viral moments came during a discussion involving Elon Musk and the attack on Paul Pelosi. Tarlov focused on rhetoric. She argued that political leaders and media figures helped normalize hostility by minimizing or mocking threats. Her delivery was controlled. Her point was straightforward. Gutfeld did not engage the substance of the argument. Instead, he reframed the moment. He interrupted her and said, "Look at you. You're getting too emotional about this." The comment redirected the debate away from cause and consequence and toward tone. It positioned emotion as weakness and logic as his territory. Tarlov responded without hesitation. "It's just estrogen," she said. "HR watches this." The studio laughed. The clip circulated widely. For many viewers, it looked like a moment of levity. In reality, it set a pattern that would repeat for years. Gutfeld used mockery to undercut credibility. Tarlov used irony to regain footing. Neither moved closer to agreement. The exchange ended where it began. Gutfeld dismissed the premise that rhetoric mattered. Tarlov reiterated that it did. Conservative viewers praised Gutfeld for calling out what they saw as performative outrage. Liberal viewers defended Tarlov for staying composed under pressure. The debate resolved nothing, but it clarified roles. By 2023, that structure had hardened. Immigration, crime, and political accountability dominated the agenda. Gutfeld increasingly framed discussions in moral terms, arguing that Democrats ignored consequences when policies failed. Tarlov countered with data, emphasizing scale, trends, and legal context. Each debate followed the same arc. One side pressed urgency, the other demanded proportion. In September 2024, abortion policy became the next inflection point, following Supreme Court decisions that returned authority to the states. Gutfeld argued that abortion was no longer a national issue. He claimed Democrats were deliberately inflating the issue to mobilize voters. His tone was dismissive. He treated the matter as settled. Tarlov challenged that claim directly. She focused on former President Trump's shifting public statements on abortion limits in Florida. She described his position as a flip-flop, pointing to specific moments where he extended support for restrictions and then retreated. Her argument centered on political calculation, not ideology. Gutfeld rejected the framing. He accused Democrats of fear-mongering and insisted that voters had already moved on. The discussion grew tense, but remained verbal. No one intervened. The show moved on. The aftermath played out online. Clips spread across X and Instagram. Liberal commentators praised Tarlov for pressing the issue with specifics. Conservative users echoed Gutfeld's claim that abortion had been artificially nationalized. The exchange did not change minds, it reinforced camps. By the end of 2024, the conflict was no longer incidental. It was expected. 2025. Escalation and emotional exposure. The dynamic shifted dramatically in 2025. Political violence moved from abstract discussion to immediate tragedy. On September 15th, the panel addressed the killing of Charlie Kirk. The atmosphere was tense before anyone spoke. Gutfeld framed the issue narrowly and decisively. He argued that recent acts of political violence overwhelmingly originated from the left. Why is only this happening on the left and not the right? He asked. That's all we need to know. His delivery was urgent. He leaned forward. He spoke faster than usual. The point was not to invite debate. It was to close it. Tarlov attempted to widen the frame. She referenced the killing of Melissa Hortman, assassinated by Vance Bolter, a figure associated with right-wing extremism. What about Melissa Hortman? She asked. The question was brief and factual. It introduced comparison. Gutfeld reacted instantly. His voice rose. Don't play that bulls with me, he said. He rejected the comparison outright. The both sides argument not only doesn't fly, we don't care. That T is dead. The tone shifted from confrontational to explosive. The studio fell silent. Other panelists did not step in. Tarlov tried to respond but was cut off. Gutfeld continued, arguing that Kirk had been targeted after sustained public demonization. While Hortman had not been subjected to the same treatment, his argument was not statistical. It was moral and personal. Tarlov stayed composed. She repeated that political violence should be condemned consistently, regardless of ideology. She emphasized responsibility across the board. She did not raise her voice. She did not retreat. The exchange ended abruptly as the show cut to break. Within minutes, clips flooded social media. Supporters of Gutfeld praised his rejection of what they called false equivalence. Critics accused him of silencing legitimate context and escalating tension. When the show returned, Gutfeld addressed Tarlov directly. I didn't mean to scream at you, he said. It's a very personal thing. The apology was brief. It was unscripted. Tarlov nodded and accepted it without comment. That moment marked a turning point. For the first time, the conflict exposed raw emotion rather than performance. For Gutfeld, the issue was no longer rhetorical. For Tarlov, consistency remained non-negotiable. After that episode, the debates lost much of their earlier humor. Later in 2025, discussions around the deaths of Renee Good and Alex Pretty reinforced the shift. The focus returned to immigration and crime. Gutfeld accused Democrats of selective outrage and moral evasion when perpetrators were undocumented immigrants. He suggested Tarlov was exploiting timing to deflect responsibility. At one point, he dismissed her argument as lunatic. Tarlov pushed back by questioning the selective framing of tragedy. She warned against using individual deaths as political weapons. The exchange ended unresolved. Online reaction followed familiar lines. Conservative forums applauded Gutfeld's bluntness. Liberal spaces condemned the language directed at Tarlov. 2026. Immigration, ICE, and institutional limits. By January 2026, the conflict reached another breaking point. The panel discussed protests against immigration and customs enforcement. Video footage played on screen. Gutfeld opened aggressively. He accused Democratic leaders of avoiding responsibility for crimes linked to undocumented immigrants. Addressing Tarlov directly, he said, "You didn't say shot." He listed homicide cases. He demanded mass deportations. When challenged, he repeated, "I don't care." Tarlov attempted to respond by emphasizing due process and proportionality. She acknowledged public safety concerns but rejected collective punishment. She described the rhetoric as cruelty disguised as populism. Gutfeld interrupted repeatedly. Voices overlapped. The structure collapsed. The show cut to commercial early. During the break, producers escorted Tarlov off the set to de-escalate the situation. Clips of the moment spread rapidly across YouTube and TikTok. Hashtags trended. Supporters framed the incident as accountability. Critics described it as silencing. Fox News issued no formal explanation. Subsequent episodes were calmer, but the balance had shifted. Tarlov appeared more cautious. Gutfeld appeared emboldened. The power asymmetry was harder to ignore. Later debates on DEI rollbacks and restrictions on transgender participation in sports followed the same pattern. Gutfeld appealed to majority opinion, framing policy as democratic expression. Tarlov challenged the moral cost, arguing that majority rule did not justify harm to minorities. Each exchange ended without resolution. Each produced predictable online fallout. Reinforcement without resolution. Across every phase, public reaction followed the same structure. Conservative audiences celebrated confrontation. Liberal audiences focused on imbalance. Media coverage highlighted spectacle over substance. The debates did not persuade undecided viewers. They reinforced existing beliefs. That outcome aligned with the design of the Five. Conflict was not incidental. It was foundational. By 2026, the Gutfeld-Tarlov conflict had become inseparable from the show's identity. Each argument layered onto the last. Each unresolved clash raised the stakes. What began as ideological disagreement evolved into a sustained public confrontation, mirroring the broader political divide in the United States. Analyzing the impact of the conflict. The conflict between Greg Gutfeld and Jessica Tarlov is driven by three forces that reinforce one another: ideology, style, and format. Each force alone would produce disagreement. Together, they produce sustained confrontation. At the ideological level, the divide is absolute. Gutfeld argues from a conservative worldview that prioritizes personal responsibility, law enforcement, and skepticism toward institutions he views as captured by progressive norms. Tarlov argues from a liberal framework that emphasizes systemic analysis, policy outcomes, and the protection of minority rights. These positions are not adjacent. They do not converge naturally. Most debates begin with incompatible assumptions, which makes compromise unlikely. Style deepens the divide. Gutfeld relies on sarcasm, ridicule, and verbal pressure. He moves quickly and uses interruption as a tactic. His language is blunt and often confrontational. Tarlov uses a different method. She brings polling data, policy studies, and historical comparison. Her delivery is measured. The clash is not only about conclusions. It is about how arguments are made. When Gutfeld dismisses data as deflection and Tarlov criticizes rhetoric as irresponsible, they are talking past each other by design. The format of the Five completes the equation. The four conservatives versus one liberal structure ensures constant pressure on the minority voice. Interruptions are expected. Speed is rewarded. Escalation keeps viewers engaged. Ratings confirm the effectiveness of this design. From 2023 through 2026, the Five consistently outperformed CNN and MSNBC in its time slot. Conflict is not a side effect. It is the mechanism. This dynamic has clear effects on the program itself. On one hand, the Gutfeld-Tarlov clashes are a major source of audience attention. Clips circulate widely. Segments trend online. On the other hand, the show faces persistent criticism for imbalance. Tarlov is frequently outnumbered, interrupted, and framed as an obstacle rather than a participant. Critics argue that the structure limits genuine debate. Supporters counter that it reflects the network's audience. Both claims can be true at the same time. The conflict has also shaped the public identities of both figures. For Gutfeld, repeated confrontations reinforce his image as a no-nonsense conservative, unwilling to indulge what he sees as evasive liberal arguments. His willingness to escalate signals authenticity to his audience. For Tarlov, the same confrontations build credibility of a different kind. She has become known as the lone liberal warrior, willing to enter hostile territory and defend her position without retreat. Her calm under pressure is central to her appeal. Importantly, the on-air conflict has not translated into long-term personal hostility. Off-camera, both maintain professional respect. Public apologies and acknowledgements suggest boundaries still exist. The tension is real, but it is contained within the workplace. There is no evidence of lasting personal fallout. Beyond the studio, the conflict mirrors broader social consequences. It reflects the depth of political polarization in the United States. Viewers do not watch to be persuaded. They watch to see their side represented forcefully. On platforms like X, reactions often harden rather than soften positions. The debates encourage participation, but they also risk normalizing verbal aggression as a substitute for resolution. This pattern is not unique. Gutfeld previously clashed with Juan Williams, at times threatening to have him removed from segments. The dynamic resembled the current one. Though it was less structured, a parallel exists on the left with Sunny Hostin on The View, where ideological clashes similarly drive attention. In each case, conflict becomes content. The impact of the Gutfeld-Tarlov conflict is therefore double-edged. It sustains viewership and sharpens political identity. At the same time, it reinforces division and limits the space for persuasion. The debates succeed as television. Whether they succeed as dialogue remains unresolved. Conclusion: what the conflict reveals. The conflict between Greg Gutfeld and Jessica Tarlov has evolved into more than a recurring on-air disagreement. It has become a symbol of how political debate functions in modern American media. On camera, the exchanges are tense, sharp, and often confrontational. Off camera, the relationship remains professional, bounded by mutual respect. That contrast defines the nature of the conflict itself. Across several years, their clashes followed a clear pattern. Ideological disagreement set the foundation. Style intensified it. Format locked it in place. Each debate reinforced the next. What viewers witnessed was not a series of isolated incidents, but a sustained confrontation shaped by the structure of the five. Conflict was not incidental. It was expected, managed, and rewarded with ratings. Looking ahead to 2026, the future of this dynamic remains open. In a political environment shaped by the post-Trump era, partisan identity still dominates media consumption. As long as Fox News maintains the 4 conservatives versus 1 liberal format, friction between Gutfeld and Tarlov is likely to continue. A shift in tone would require a shift in structure. Without that, moderation remains unlikely. However, if audience fatigue grows or network priorities change, the intensity of these confrontations could soften without fully disappearing. The broader significance of the conflict extends beyond the individuals involved. It reflects a media ecosystem that prioritizes representation over persuasion. Viewers tune in to see their worldview defended, not challenged. Debate becomes performance. Disagreement becomes identity. While this model encourages engagement, it also carries risk. Repeated exposure to combative rhetoric can normalize hostility and reduce the space for nuance. At the same time, the Gutfeld-Tarlov dynamic demonstrates that opposing views can coexist within a single platform. Their willingness to return to the table, episode after episode, shows that dialogue is still possible, even under pressure. The problem is not disagreement itself. It is the absence of conditions that allow disagreement to lead anywhere. Ultimately, this conflict is not just entertainment. It is a reflection of contemporary American society. It shows how division is packaged, consumed, and sustained. It also underscores a persistent need, not for less debate, but for forms of debate that illuminate rather than entrench. Whether television can evolve toward that goal remains an open question.